Picture this. You drive to a gas station, empty. You drive to the next one, empty. Then the government makes an announcement. Fuel sales to civilians are now banned. Not rationed, banned. This is Crimea, right now. But here's what nobody is talking about. This isn't just a fuel shortage story. This is a signal, a crack in the machine. And when you connect it to a secret letter sent directly to Putin and a classified 40-day military operation quietly authorized by Zelensky, what emerges is a picture of a war that may be turning at its most invisible, most critical layer, logistics. Because armies don't lose wars only on the battlefield. They lose them when the trucks stop moving, when the refineries burn, when the fuel runs out. And right now, Russia's fuel is running out. Let's start with the facts on the ground. Over recent weeks, fuel stations across Russian-occupied Crimea have been running dry. Not slowly, not gradually. Fast. The occupying authorities declared an energy state of emergency and imposed a total ban on selling gasoline and diesel to civilians. Every drop of available fuel has been redirected to one customer only, the military. Now, why does this matter so much? Because Crimea is not just a piece of occupied territory. It is the logistical spine of Russia's entire southern military operation. Supplies, troops, ammunition, armored vehicles, everything flows through Crimea. The peninsula hosts major fuel depots that feed frontline Russian units in Kherson and Zaporizhia. If this node, the most strategically critical hub in southern Ukraine, is running so low on fuel that they're cutting off civilians entirely, we're looking at a system under extreme, unsustainable stress. And here's what makes this even more alarming. This is happening before winter, before heating demand spikes, before road conditions deteriorate and fuel consumption by military vehicles increases. This is not the worst-case moment for Russian logistics. This is supposed to be a manageable period, and they're already rationing. So ask yourself, what happens when the temperature drops? Now we get to the document that, if fully verified, represents one of the most extraordinary admissions since this war began. Igor Sechin. He is not a mid-level bureaucrat. He is the CEO of Rosneft, Russia's largest oil company, controlling roughly 40% of domestic production. He is one of the most powerful men in Russia. Former FSB, a member of Putin's innermost circle for over 2 decades. One of perhaps 5 people in the entire country with unconditional direct access to the Kremlin. This man wrote a letter to Putin, and in that letter, he used a specific phrase to describe the state of Russian refineries hit by Ukrainian strikes: unprecedented damage. 2 words, enormous weight. Because Sechin is not a man who panics. He is not a man who dramatizes. He is a cold-blooded technocrat, shaped by decades in intelligence. If he is writing unprecedented in a confidential letter to his president, it means the situation has exceeded every internal benchmark, every crisis model they had prepared for. So what exactly has been hit? Ukraine's long-range drone campaign has systematically targeted refinery infrastructure deep inside Russian territory, not just near the border. We're talking about facilities hundreds of kilometers from the front line that Moscow considered completely safe. Ryazan, Saratov, Krasnodar, facilities that process crude oil into the diesel and aviation fuel the Russian military runs on. The logic is brutal in its simplicity. You don't need to destroy the army. You destroy the fuel that moves the army. And Sechin's letter tells us something crucial. It's working. Russia's refinery output has fallen sharply. Diesel exports, a critical revenue stream for the Kremlin, have been disrupted. And internally, the shortage is now severe enough that the CEO of the country's largest oil company felt compelled to write an emergency letter to the president. Think about that chain of events. A crisis so serious that Sechin, a man who has navigated every sanction, every geopolitical earthquake of the past 20 years, had to put it in writing and send it upstairs. Now let's talk about the operation that connects all of this. Zelensky has publicly confirmed, and this is remarkable in itself because these things are rarely announced, that he authorized a strategic 40-day operation specifically designed to hit energy nodes and drain Russian military fuel reserves. 40 days, a specific time frame, a specific target set. This is not random drone harassment. This is a coordinated strategic campaign with defined objectives, defined duration, and, judging by Sechin's letter and the Crimea fuel crisis, measurable results. Let's think about what energy nodes actually means in military terms. It's not just refineries, it's pipeline junctions that feed fuel to forward military bases. Railway fuel transfer points, because Russia moves enormous quantities of diesel by rail to its frontline logistics hubs. Underground storage facilities in occupied territories. Port infrastructure in Crimea used to offload tanker shipments. Hit enough of these in a compressed time frame, and you don't just create a shortage, you create chaos in the supply chain. Units at the front start receiving inconsistent fuel deliveries. Commanders can't plan operations reliably. Armored vehicle movements get restricted. Artillery resupply slows. Here's the strategic genius, and I want to be precise about this, of targeting fuel rather than soldiers. Soldiers can be replaced, unfortunately. Fuel infrastructure cannot be rebuilt in 40 days. A refinery that takes a precision drone strike to its distillation column is offline for months, sometimes longer. And Russia, already under Western sanctions that restrict its access to specialized refinery equipment, cannot simply order replacement parts from a catalog. Every facility Sechin listed in that letter as unprecedented damage represents a months-long reduction in military fuel production. And here is the second layer that makes this campaign even more significant. Russia needs fuel for two things simultaneously: its military operations and its domestic economy. These two demands are now in direct competition. When military consumption takes priority, and it always does in wartime, civilians get cut off, which is exactly what we're seeing in Crimea. But civilian fuel shortages have economic consequences. Transport costs rise, agricultural machinery sits idle, industrial output drops, and a population already exhausted by war starts to feel the war in their daily lives in a new, very immediate way. Let's zoom out to the broader economic picture, because the fuel crisis doesn't exist in isolation. Russia's war economy has been running on three assumptions. High oil revenues would fund everything, Western sanctions could be routed around indefinitely, and the population would absorb the costs without breaking. All three of those assumptions are now under serious pressure simultaneously. Oil revenues, the primary funding mechanism for the war, have been squeezed from two sides. The price cap imposed by Western nations on Russian oil exports has reduced per-barrel earnings, and now, with domestic refinery capacity damaged, Russia faces a painful irony. It has crude oil in the ground, but reduced capacity to turn it into the refined products the military actually needs. Crude and diesel are not the same thing. You can't put crude oil in a tank. Meanwhile, Russia's central bank has raised interest rates to extraordinary levels, above 16%, to combat inflation that is running far hotter than official figures suggest. Fuel inflation is particularly severe because fuel price increases cascade through every sector of the economy. Food costs more to transport, construction materials cost more to move, factory output costs more to ship, and the demographic reality underneath all of this: Russia has been pulling working-age men out of the economy and sending them to the front. Labor shortages are real, productivity is down, and the men who remain are being asked to do more in an economy that is quietly contracting beneath the surface of official propaganda. Let me make something concrete, because fuel shortage sounds bureaucratic. It isn't. A single Russian combined arms battalion consumes thousands of liters of diesel every single day. Not in combat, just existing. Generators running, vehicles idling, logistics trucks moving supplies. Add actual offensive operations, and that number multiplies dramatically. Now scale that across the entire Russian force deployed in Ukraine. This army requires an uninterrupted, massive flow of refined fuel just to hold its current position before advancing a single meter. This is why targeting logistics is so devastatingly effective. You don't need to destroy the tank. You need to make it run out of fuel 3 kilometers before the objective. Military historians call this culmination, the point where an attacking force has consumed so many resources it can no longer sustain offensive operations. Look at Russia's rate of advance over the past 12 months, measured in hundreds of meters per week, at enormous cost. That is not the behavior of an army with confident logistics. That is an army rationing its offensive capacity. Independent researchers and Western defense institutes are tracking something significant. Fuel resupply intervals to frontline Russian units have been increasing. The gap between when units request fuel and when they receive it is widening. In some sectors, Ukrainian forces have captured Russian armored vehicles, abandoned not because of enemy fire, but because they ran out of fuel mid-operation. Connect that to Sechin's letter. Unprecedented damage to the infrastructure feeding that supply chain, and you see a system that is not broken, but bending. And systems that bend under sustained intelligent pressure eventually reach a breaking point. So where does this lead? 3 scenarios. I'll give you all 3, because honest analysis means accounting for uncertainty. The 40-day operation achieves its objectives. Russian frontline units begin experiencing consistent fuel shortfalls. Offensive operations slow. The tempo of Russian attacks, which has been grinding and steady, drops noticeably. This creates a window in which Ukrainian defensive lines can stabilize and Western military aid can be absorbed more effectively. This is the optimistic scenario, and the Sechin letter suggests it may already be partially underway. Russia is not a static actor. It has demonstrated the ability to adapt supply chains under pressure, rerouting through Iran, North Korea, China. It may accelerate domestic refinery repair using non-Western equipment sourced through sanctions evasion. The fuel crisis in Crimea gets managed through extreme rationing. The military maintains operational continuity, and the strategic impact of the campaign is real but insufficient to change the fundamental balance. This is the cautious scenario, and the honest one to keep in mind. The damage to refinery infrastructure compounds. Spare parts remain unavailable. The 40-day campaign is followed by a second, then a third. Fuel shortages spread from Crimea to other occupied territories. Russian military operational capacity degrades significantly. Not all at once, but in a slow, accelerating spiral that begins to show up on the front lines as lost ground. This is the scenario that Sechin's letter, read carefully, seems most afraid of. Wars are decided by many things: courage, strategy, technology, international support. But underneath all of that, underneath the missiles and the politics and the headlines, wars run on fuel. And right now in Crimea, the pumps are empty. That one image tells you more about the state of this conflict than 100 press briefings. Watch the logistics. Watch the fuel. Watch what happens in the next 40 days. If you found this analysis useful, share it with someone who's trying to understand what's actually happening in this war, beneath the noise. See you in the next one.